Hello, once again. You know what day it is. It is time for the Fantasy Points Friday Night Hype Show. I'm Matt Donnelly, and this week, it is week number 18, the final week of the NFL regular season. Hey, don't worry. There's fantasy football playoffs going on. There's DFS still going on all throughout, right up until the Super Bowl, basically. But this week we are going to preview the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Tennessee Titans, the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals, the New York Giants versus the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Detroit Lions versus the Green Bay Packers. But first, hey, there's some injuries that we need to talk about before we get into this week's slate of games. And this week, things are going to get a little bit weird, a little freaky when we talk about fantasy football. But there's still injuries like Lamar Jackson, questionable with that PCL injury. Tyler Huntley, he looks like he could be the starting quarterback, but he's also dealing with a little bit of an ailment of his own. So could Anthony Brown be under center for that contest against the Bengals? Wait and see. Jalen Hurts, still limited in practice there, dealing with that shoulder injury. I expect him to be ready to go here against the New York Giants. Derrick Henry, we know he's going to be probable there with that hip injury. He's going to be good to go against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week in a must-win game for the Tennessee Titans. Deebo Samuel, ankle, MCL. Don't expect him back in week 18, but he's going to be there for the first round of the playoffs. We just don't know if San Francisco's going to have a bye or they're going to be the number 2 seed. Tony Pollard, they're dealing with a quad injury. He is probable. We've also got Tua Tagovailoa dealing with concussion. He is out this week. And Teddy Bridgewater with that finger dislocation, he is questionable, which brings up the point. Is it going to be Mike Glennon or Skylar Thompson? Now, my guess is Mike Glennon wins this by a neck. Now, we've also got Nick Foles. He's dealing with a rib injury there. He is doubtful. We've also got James Conner dealing with a shin. He logged a DNP here on Thursday. Wait and see what happens here throughout Friday through Saturday ahead of that contest. Antonio Gibson, he's got that left knee sprain. He has been put on the IR by the Washington Commanders. DeAndre Hopkins, his season is over. He is not playing in week number 18. And Justin Fields, likewise there, as he's dealing with that hip issue. Now, check in with Fantasy Points' very own DPT there, Edwin Porras, and the Fantasy Points podcast for the latest injury updates ahead of week number 18. Now, we're going to do things a little bit different here because not all teams have the same thing that they're playing for this week. Some are looking for qualifying for the playoffs, and that's it. Some players, they're looking to secure that bag. There's some incentives out there, and some are chasing milestones. So we're going to talk about some of these players who you can probably insert into your fantasy football lineups, those DFS lineups, because they have something to play for this week. Now, we start off in Vegas where the Kansas City Chiefs, they play on Saturday against the Las Vegas Raiders. With so much still up in the air when it comes to this number 1 seed, Kansas City, they win, they get it. But you know what? The Raiders, they would like nothing more than to take that number 1 seed away from the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Anytime that the Raiders have a chance to mess things up for the Chiefs, you better believe that they're going to go out there and do their best to do so. Now, raise your hand if you knew that all that Devontae Adams needed was a little bit of Jared Stidham there in his life. After 3 straight weeks of fewer than 11 fantasy points, Adams hauled in 7 of 11 targets for 153 yards, 2 touchdowns against the 49ers defense that is considered to be one of the best in the business. Now, we're going to talk about Juju. He's got some milestones here for the Raiders here. After already setting the Raiders single-season receiving record, he could eclipse 1,500 yards this week if he hauls in 57 yards against this Chiefs team, and he also sits 5 grabs away for 100 on the season. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster, he can earn himself a cool $1.5 million there if he gets himself 2 more receiving yards to give him 900 on the season. That's right. He's at 898 receiving yards. So he's within 102 of 1,000 this season. Now heading over, we're talking about Tennessee and Jacksonville, but they're on the primetime preview here. So we'll talk about that game a little bit later. Now on Sunday, we have Tampa Bay at Atlanta. Now, Tampa Bay, there's no incentives on the line for them. Brady and the Bucs, they clinched that NFC South division last week. So look for them to rest their starters again this week, much like they did the previous 16 weeks prior to last week's contest against the Carolina Panthers. Now, that week 17 explosion, that's when Mike Evans, he extended his record to 9 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to begin his career. Now, speaking of 1,000 yards, Tyler Algier, he is just 100 yards away from 1,000 yards during his rookie campaign. Not bad. Next up, how about New England at Buffalo? Now, we are uncertain how this game is going to shake out here. The Bills, they basically Do they need to win? Do they not need to win? I mean, if the Kansas City Chiefs claim that 1 seed, then we're looking at Cincinnati versus Buffalo for that number 2 seed, essentially. Meanwhile, the Patriots, this is a must-win game. One of those win-and-you're-in type scenarios there. We've also got the Dolphins, who are 8-8. If they win against the Jets and the Patriots lose to the Bills, the Dolphins get in. But wait, hey, the Steelers, they can clinch with a Browns victory and a Dolphins loss and a Patriots loss. So, hey, the Steelers, they're not done yet either. So much on the line here in this contest. Now, hopefully, Ramondre Stevenson's ankle is feeling much better this week as the Patriots running back. He sits 14 yards away from 1,000 rushing yards on the season. Then again, Stevenson, he has failed to run for more than 60 yards in 7 of the last 8 contests. Minnesota at Chicago. We have all been deprived of Justin Fields missing this game. He was just 64 yards shy of Lamar Jackson's quarterback rushing record. But a Bears loss with the Texans win, and the Bears, they could own the number 1 overall draft pick in this upcoming draft. And Justin Fields, we know he's shutting down. So basically, Chicago is doing a low-key version of tanking. Not that they haven't already done that much in the season. Meanwhile, the Vikings, they need a get-right type game after that embarrassing loss to the Packers last week. Now, keep an eye on TJ Hawkinson this week as the Vikings tight end. He is just 102 yards shy of 1,000 on the season himself. Now, Houston at Indianapolis. Can both teams take an L? I really think that's what both these teams really want. They're both in search of a top-tier prospect at the quarterback position. Now, technically, Michael Pittman, he has something to play for the Colts as he is just 4 receptions shy of 100 on the season, and he sits 105 yards away from 1,000. New York at Miami. We already talked about playoff implications on the line for the Dolphins here, but please, let this be Joe Flacco versus Mike Lennon for a possible playoff berth on the line. Mike White, he is still dealing with that rib injury, while Tua Tagovailoa and Teddy Bridgewater, we know they're both unlikely to play. Newly signed Mike Lennon, like I said, he has a neck up on the competition when it comes to Skylar Thompson, who really hasn't been very good. Now, can whoever is under center get the most out of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, whose average yards per route run this season are a 3.3 and 2.67, which are the first and 7th most over the last 3 seasons. Carolina at New Orleans. In a game that seems almost meaningless, you get Sam Darnold, who in the face of pressure this season has been one of the best quarterbacks when looking at fantasy points per drop back. Heck, he even found a way to resurrect DJ Moore, who now sits 122 yards shy of 1,000 on the season, and he has scored a touchdown in 4 of the last 5 contests. As for the Saints, Carolina, they are missing both their starting corners, so you have to feel that Chris Olave, who's just 18 yards shy of 1,000 himself, and Rashid Shaheed, they are great value plays there in DFS. Donta Foreman, he won another milestone, 154 yards away from 1,000 yards rushing. Meanwhile, I mentioned that DJ Moore, 122 away from 1,000. If you prorate those receiving totals to a competent quarterback, it translates into roughly 1,700 yards, 15 touchdowns. Now, don't fact check me there. Now, Cleveland at Pittsburgh. How is it that no Steeler quarterback has thrown for more than 1 touchdown in any game this season? Now, I need to go back and fact check that because that doesn't quite seem right considering what Kenny Pickett has done late in ball games the last couple weeks. Yeah, no, it's true. I did the fact check it there. Now, if Pittsburgh wins and the Dolphins lose and the Patriots lose, then the Steelers somehow sneak in the playoffs and Mike Tomlin finishes with a winning record for like the 15th consecutive season. Now, in order to win this week, he probably needs a little bit of help from Deontay Johnson. Can we please get this man a touchdown? His 84 receptions without a touchdown are more than the 75 touchdown list catches that Raymond Berry had back in 1961 when we're talking about wide receivers. Running back wise, James Wilder, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers there, he had 85 catches back in 1984. You want more futility when it comes to closing in on records? How about Johnson sits 119 receiving yards away from Al Toon of the New York Jets record mark of 963 receiving yards back in that 1991 season. As for the Browns, Watson, just continue doing what you're doing, which is not a whole heck of a lot, but it is finding Amari Cooper there, who is just 1 touchdown shy of a double-digit touchdown season. So, hey, we've got that going for us, Browns fans. Now, Los Angeles Chargers at the Denver Broncos. The Chargers, they don't need this game to win, but what they do need is they need to win this to hold on to that number 5 seed. If they finish 5th, they would face the winner of Tennessee and Jacksonville. And a loss could potentially open the door for the Ravens to slide into that number 5 seed, which would knock the Chargers down to number 6, where they could face Kansas City, Buffalo, or more than likely Cincinnati. Now, depending on how that all kind of shapes out. One Charger that's looking to cash in this week is Gerald Everett, who needs 5 receptions this week To get 60 on the season, that's an extra $250,000 in his pocket. Austin Eckler sits 119 yards away from his first ever 1,000-yard rushing season, while Mike Williams is 137 receiving yards away from 1,000. And that's considering he's missed a significant portion of the season so far. Arizona at San Francisco. It sounds like Kyler Murray's surgery on that ACL was a success, so you can officially start his clock for the next 9 to 10 month window right now. Now, for redraft, I would not expect Kyler Murray to do Kyler Murray type things until at least November, and we probably won't see him start a game until probably mid to late October. Now, how about Brock Purdy, who's thrown 2 or more touchdowns in 5 straight contests, and that's without Deebo Samuel, who could be back just in time for the playoffs along with Elijah Mitchell. Now, hopefully, Brock Purdy, he can target himself a little bit of Brandon Ayuk there, as the 49ers receiver sits just 44 yards shy of 1,000. How about the Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks? A Seattle win and a Packers loss, and the Seahawks are off to the wild card round. Now, the funny thing is here, while a Seattle victory here ends the Detroit Lions playoff hopes, it actually improves the Detroit Lions draft positioning here, as they own the Los Angeles Rams first round selection. But I doubt the Lions care very much around that pick right now and rather get a shot at playoffs. Now, Tyler Higbee, he just needs 13 more receiving yards to cash in on a $500,000 incentive for hitting 600 yards on the season. Higbee has 17 receptions over the last 3 contests, and basically he's the only pass catcher in LA that you could possibly look at rostering. Now, you need some more potential milestones. How about the rookie there, Kenneth Walker, 64 yards shy of 1,000. He just needs one more touchdown to hit double-digit touchdowns there in his rookie season. Tyler Lockett, dealing with a finger issue there. He's got those screws and whatnot going on there. Well, he's also hoping for 21 more receiving yards in this contest as he looks to break 1,000 on the year. The Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Commanders, this could be one of the higher scoring games that no one's really giving it credit for. The Commanders, they are starting Sam Howell this week, and it's safe to say that the Carson Wentz experience, it's over. Tyler Heineke, he's done. They were not the answers there in Washington. Looking for a sneaky play. How about Jahan Dotson as number 2 wide receivers versus Dallas? They have been money all season long. On the other side of the ball, Dak Prescott versus cover 4 is guaranteed fantasy gold as he averages 0.42 fantasy points per dropback this season, again, against cover 4. Elliott has 866 yards rushing. Tony Pollard has 988 yards rushing, both of them closing in on that 1,000 rushing yard milestone. There, that's it. Those are those games. Now let's talk about some of the bigger games this week, starting with Jacksonville at Tennessee. This is a win, and you get the division title scenario here. The AFC title, it will be determined in this contest. For Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, he looks to have taken that secondary leap here late in the season, including a 368-yard performance against his Titan team just a few weeks back when he completed 30 of 42 passes and connected with his pass catchers 3 times, resulting in touchdowns. Lawrence, he sits just 99 yards away from 4,000 passing yards this season, and he's been able to spread the ball around as Christian Kirk, he recorded his first 1,000-yard season. Zay Jones, he sits at 802 yards, and Evan Ingram has even posted 69 receptions and 739 yards this season. This doesn't even include the 1,108 rushing yards that Travis Etienne has contributed. Now, as for those pass catchers that are facing a Titans secondary that is allowing 40 fantasy points per game this season to the wide receiver position, they've also allowed 812 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns over their last 4 contests. Not only are the Jaguars receivers playing for a shot at the playoff, but Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, they have some attainable incentives on the line that have some pretty impressive dollar values associated with them. Now, Jones, he earned himself $250,000 extra dollars when he caught his 70th pass of the season. With 2 more catches, he could hit 80. With 12 more catches, he could hit 90. And at each of those milestones comes an extra $250,000. That's right. If Zay Jones catches 12 passes somehow this contest, that's $500,000 in his pocket. The last time that these teams met, Zay Jones, he would go on to see 12 targets, hauling in 8 of them for 77 yards. As for Christian Kirk, again, another receiver sitting at 78 receptions who's got milestone earnings at 80, 90, and 100. Yes, $500,000 at each one of those milestones. So 2 more catches, that's $500K extra in Christian Kirk's pocket. And you can guarantee that Trevor Lawrence will be targeting him this week. As for the Tennessee Titans, they dropped a meaningless game last week, a game in which they essentially rested any starter who's battling any potential nagging injury just to make sure that they were right for this contest. This game right here, Derrick Henry, he will be back in the lineup as will Joshua Dobbs, who will once again be under center this week in that win and you're in type scenario for the Titans. Last week, Dobbs, he would end up going 20 of 39 for 232 yards and a touchdown, along with an interception in that start against the Cowboys. Malik Willis, he started 3 games earlier in the season, and never once did he top 100 yards passing in any of those contests. This is a pretty good matchup for Dobbs, as the Jaguars have allowed top 10 fantasy production against the quarterback position throughout the season. Now, you're going to want to keep an eye on the injury report when it comes to Treylon Burks, because he is dealing with some stuff here throughout this week here. But Dobbs, he has seemed to develop some kind of chemistry with the Titans' first-round selection. Of the 232 passing yards last week that Dobbs recorded against the Cowboys, 66 of them went to Burks, who hauled in 4 of his 8 targets. Jacksonville, they are allowing just under 25.5 fantasy points per contest to opposing wide receivers and have allowed 3 touchdowns to the position over the last 4 weeks. If you're looking for a fantasy DFS play this week, it's probably wise to use an alpha wide receiver in a poor offense versus an average wide receiver in a great offense. And I'm looking at you, Juju Smith-Schuster. Then again, why pass when you can just run the rock? Derrick Henry, like most of this roster last week, they sat out the game. So you know Derrick Henry, he's got them fresh legs going for this all-important divisional showdown. Just a few weeks ago, Henry, he would run for 121 yards on 17 attempts against this Jaguars defense. It was the first of 3 consecutive 100-yard games there, prior to him missing last week's contest with that hip injury. The game number 2 on this preview show, the Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals. And you know when you get AFC North teams going head-to-head, there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way, because these teams, they're going to get after it. And the road to the Super Bowl, we know it's got to go through Kansas City, but does it go through Cincinnati or does it go through Buffalo first? Knowing the Bengals, they'd rather host the Bills and then go to Cincinnati. While the Bills, hey, if I'm the Bengals, I don't want to go to Buffalo and then have to go to Kansas City to get that shot at the Super Bowl. So this is a very important matchup as well for Baltimore. Better late than never when it comes to Andrews there. Mark Andrews, he finally came through for fantasy managers last week, finishing with 19 fantasy points when he hauled in 9 targets for 100 yards. It was the first time since Lamar Jackson went down with that injury that Andrews had more than 13 fantasy points in any of those contests. Now, that's basically 8 weeks of lack of production. Since returning from injury, one person who has been productive, J.K. Dobbins, he has been getting the job done in this Ravens backfield. He has 397 rushing yards while averaging nearly 7 yards per carry, which is more than any other running back over the last 4 weeks. And last week, he outsnapped Gus the Bus Edwards 26-9. So you better expect a heavy dose of Dobbins in this contest. Over the last 4 weeks, there's been no team better than the Cincinnati Bengals when it comes to stopping the run game. That's in fantasy, and that's in the National Football League. They're limiting, whatever you want to call it, opposing running backs to 9.25 fantasy points per game, and they've held them to a total of 250 yards and no scores in the last 4 contests. If you want to move the ball against the Bengals, receivers would be a great option if you had any, as they have allowed 625 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns over that same 4-week period. However, Demarcus Robinson and James Prochet likely don't have the Bengals overly concerned. Now, speaking of concerns, maybe the Bengals should be concerned about Isaiah Likely, who's a deep sleeper in this game. He may be a tight end by designation, but the dude plays like a wide receiver. So if you're looking for a value play this week, you could do no worse. For Cincinnati, Jamar Chase, he is chasing 1,000 yards once again, and he sits just 40 yards shy of that mark. If Chase, he can get 40 yards this week, then he and Higgins would be one of 3 sets of teammates to record 1,000 yards receiving, along with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith of the Eagles. That said, there are several other combinations out there that are also closing in that mark. Justin Jefferson and T.J. Hawkinson, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, D.K. Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who have at least one of those pass catches at 1,000 and the other within 100 yards of that mark. Now, it's also a good sign for Chase that Joe Burrow sits inside the top 12 among signal callers there in yards per attempt, adjusted completion percentage, and big-time throw rate since week number 9. It's also a reason why Burrow had fantasy managers playing in the fantasy championship last week. Now, even without week 17 on the books, Burrow sits 5th in the NFL with 4,260 passing yards, and he's thrown for 34 touchdowns while averaging 7.6 yards per attempt this season. Joe Cool has been Joe heating up just in time for the playoffs. The last few weeks, we have seen the Ravens adjust and find success running a majority of their coverages out of zone. The problem with that, however, is according to PFF, Chase has the 20th highest receiving grade this season against zone coverages. And he's also got a 29% target share and a nearly 37% air yard share. Now, here's hoping that we get the Jamar Chase versus a Marlon Humphrey matchup, because that is a heavyweight wide receiver corner matchup that I want to see this week. This game may mean nothing, and it may mean a whole heck of a lot when it comes down to it on Sunday. Either way, whenever these divisional rivals get together, you can expect this game to be physical. One other little side note here in this contest, if we do get that Jamar Chase versus Marlon Humphrey match, then I would love to stack T. Higgins with Joe Burrow this week, as Brandon Stevens is going to probably be in coverage on T. Higgins most of this contest. Now let's flip the script here to Philadelphia, the New York Giants. Hey, the Giants, they don't really have anything to play for. They're locked into that number 6 seed. They can't go up, they can't go down, but the Eagles, they can finish everywhere from 1st, 2nd, 5th. I mean, they can be all over the map here, but hey, if they win, they get home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So this game means a little bit more to the Eagles than it does to the Giants. Will the Giants start their starters? Will the starters finish the game? I don't know, but Daniel Jones, a.k.a. Vanilla Vic, he was at it once again last week, taking names and winning fantasy championships. Now, the big reason for that is he hasn't turned the ball over. In fact, his 0.5 turnovers per game are tied with Jalen Hurts for the fewest at the quarterback position in the NFL this season. It also doesn't hurt when you've run the ball for over 700 yards and thrown for more than 3,200 yards while contributing 22 total touchdowns. Jones, he has been efficient, if nothing else, with the ball posting a completion percentage of 70 in 3 of the last 5 contests. And last week, he completed 79% of his passes, albeit for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also added 2 scores on the ground for 91 yards. If the Giants do start their starters or they sit their starters, I mean, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But anyway, Richie James is an interesting play in a favorable matchup out of the slot. James already has 57 receptions, 569 yards. Not bad for a punt returner, and he's averaging over 10 yards per reception in 3 straight contests. We know that the Eagles' perimeter defense is stout with James Bradbury and Darius Slay manning the boundaries there. But Avonte Maddox there, he is out of the slot. He is out of this contest, and that is one area in which the Giants, they have an advantage. Now, per Joe Dolan and the Fantasy Points Market Report, and I quote here, New York Giants, with their win over the Colts in week number 17, the Giants have locked themselves into the number 6 seed in the NFC. That is per Football Outsiders, almost certainly going to result in a matchup with the reeling Minnesota Vikings in the first round. Now, for the Vikings to ascend to number 2 seed, they would need to beat the Bears and the 49ers lose to the Cardinals. Again, continuing on with Joe Dolan's market report here, though Coach Dable, he refused to commit there one way or the other, whether he's going to play his starters against the Eagles. Betting markets, they believe that he's going to be prudent there and rest some of his guys. The Eagles are currently 13.5-point favorites there. I've seen that jump to 14 here in the last couple hours here, as they are playing for that number 1 seed and will go balls to the wall. So it's possible Dable, he starts the game with Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, and others. But as the Giants have been one of the more injured teams in the NFL all season long, they have an extremely winnable game, likely at least with the Vikings on tap in the wild card round there next week, risking their health against an Eagles team with everything to play for and really everything to lose is probably foolish. Those playing fantasy with Barkley, Jones, and others should not plan on a full game from him. Again, that is from Joe Dolan and that market report. For Philadelphia, the Eagles, there's a good chance that they have Jalen Hurts back this week. Not that Gardner Minshew was terrible, but he simply wasn't able to get the job done. He simply wasn't able to do what Jalen Hurts is able to do on the field, especially in that matchup against the Saints last week. Philadelphia, they need this win to clinch that number 1 seed in the NFC. And back in week number 14, Hurts would throw for 2 scores and 217 yards against this Giants defense while adding 77 more yards on the ground and a touchdown. How good has Jalen Hurts and this Eagles offense been that we totally take for granted that they have 3 players eclipse 1,000 yards on the season? Swole Batman there, A.J. Brown, he's sitting at 1,401 yards on 84 receptions. Well, Skinny Batman, see what I'm going here? Skinny Batman, Devontae Smith has 88 receptions for 1,129 yards. Not bad, but it seems to be getting overshadowed thanks in part on the season that Jalen Hurts has been putting together. I did say there were 3 members of the 1,000-yard club here, as the third is that dude that is criminally underrated, constantly disrespected, despite running for 1,236 yards, which is the 5th most in the NFL. He got selected to the Pro Bowl that people don't even think he deserves to be in. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Miles Sanders, who since week number 12 is averaging 85 yards per game and over 16 and a half touches. And you go back to week number 14, it was Miles Sanders who ran for 144 yards and a pair of touchdowns. If the Giants rest their starters and the Eagles can put this game away early, then expect the Eagles to kind of pull some of their starters back in the second half, much like they did earlier on in the season when their offense was absolutely destroying defenses before the second half would even kick off. Our final stop this week is in Green Bay, where the Detroit Lions are taking on the Green Bay Packers. That number 7 wild card seed is on the line. The Packers, they can clinch with the win against the Lions. For the Lions to reach the playoffs, they need to take care of this Packers team and hope for a little bit of help from the Rams, who are facing that Seahawks team. Essentially, we will know if this Packers-Lions matchup has what kind of playoff implications it has prior to kickoff. But regardless, you know that Dan Campbell, he will have his team ready. Dan Campbell doesn't really seem like a rest your starters kind of guy. Now, DeAndre Swift, he is turning into that league winner that we all envisioned him to be back when this season first started. Unfortunately, he wasn't healthy enough to deliver on all those expectations until just a couple of weeks ago. Last week against Chicago, Swift turned 15 touches into 2 touchdowns, 117 yards, while on his way to a 26.7 fantasy point performance there. Surprisingly, among backs with at least 75 attempts, Swift's 37% rushing attempts in which he has avoided tackles is the most in the National Football League. Now, speaking of running backs, why is no one talking more about Jamal Williams? Well, I feel like I'm the only one who talks about this guy. That man is a national treasure and needs to be protected at all costs. Last week against the Bears, Williams ran the ball 22 times for 144 yards and a touchdown. That left him just 6 yards shy of 1,000 yards on the season, in which he gets another 250K if he accomplishes that. The last time the Lions had a 1,000-yard rusher, you have to go all the way back to 2013 when Reggie Bush would finish with 1,006 yards. Prior to Bush, you have to go back to 2004 when Kevin Jones accomplished the feat with 1,133 yards. How about Williams' 15 touchdowns? Why is no one talking about 15 touchdowns from Jamal Williams here? You have to go all the way back to Barry Sanders in 1991, who had 16 rushing touchdowns, which was a team record for the Lions, to find a Lion who has run for more scores than what Williams has done. Sure, the Lions' playoff hopes, it can be long gone before kickoff even begins. That Seattle win eliminates the Lions, but Detroit, they're still going to have plenty to play for on the road in Lambeau. And regardless of how this sets up, you know that Detroit is going to take pride in their abilities to knock off the Packers and keep them from going to the postseason. Now, Jair Alexander and company, they did a number on Justin Jefferson last week. Let's give credit where credit is due. This week, they face a Lions passing attack that features Jameson Williams, DJ Chark, and of course, the sun god himself, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, St. Brown not only leads the league in targets per route run at 30.6%, it's also the highest such total for a receiver under the age of 22 in NFL history. So now how about those Green Bay Packers right now? A win and you're in type scenario for the Packers. That didn't even seem possible entering December. Then again, how many people forgot that the Rodgers and the Pack are 29-0 in the month of December under Matt LaFleur? And now the Packers, they've won 4 straight games to push the record to 8-8. It's also impressive to think Rodgers sits 12th in the NFL in passing yards with 3,490 and 25 passing touchdowns. That sits 7th in the NFL, and he's slinging the ball to dudes named Randall Cobb, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Al Lazard, and Robert Tonyan. We also know that this Lions defense, it has improved in recent weeks, and it did pick off Rodgers 3 times back on November 6th, but they are still allowing 20.6 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and 38.4 fantasy points to receivers over the last month, which is top 8 in that category, in both those categories. It looks as though rookie Christian Watson, he is that de facto number 1 receiver in Green Bay, even as he continues to try and get right from that hip injury. Rodgers still targeted basically a one-hipped Christian Watson 19.2% of the time, while Watson would run his air yard share up to over 48% last week. Last week, Aaron Jones outcarried A.J. Dillon 14-12, which doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot until you look at the production there, which was certainly eye-popping, as Jones would finish with 111 yards on the ground to Dillon's 41 against the Vikings. That said, Jones, he doesn't have a rushing score since like November 13th. That is a span of 6 contests. While Dillon, he has found the end zone in 5 straight games, including a 2-touchdown performance against the Rams. Now, I know that nobody wants to play the Chargers in the AFC. And you have to think, with the way that the Packers are currently playing, nobody wants to see Aaron Rodgers and company on the schedule once the playoffs begin. After all, the Packers have been playing elimination games since the start of December. Now, before I let you go, I need you right now to head over to fantasypoints.com and get in on their super early bird rate there for your subscription, running right up into the Super Bowl. What is that? Not only do you get 30% off of next season there, you also get the rest of this season for free. It's included there. You're not going to find a better deal out there right now. This is the best bang for your buck subscription that you could possibly get as it pertains to fantasy football. I believe I speak for myself and the rest of the Fantasy Points crew when I say thank you for choosing to spend time with us this season. Thank you for sending your questions. Thank you for trusting us in doing what we do. And thank you for allowing us to help you get better each and every week. And we hope you continue to do this throughout the offseason and into the next year. Take care.